cracked up to be. Let's have a look. But first, let's look at what is inside the box real quick. And here you see the version I got, Redmi 9, Sunset Purple, 3 gigs of RAM, 32 gigs of storage, but there are up to 6 gigs of RAM variants for this phone. This is the Hong Kong version. As you can see, it supports NFC. Lifting the lid, and here we have the SIM ejector tool, paperwork, and in here's where you would have found this TPU case. Pretty standard, transparent TPU case for the Redmi 9. And we have our USB-A to USB-C cable, and this is the Hong Kong UK plug, and this is only a 10-watt charger here.
Despite its incredibly low price, the Redmi 9 doesn't look cheap. There is a nice grippy texture on the plastic back that ends around the camera setup, and it makes the phone feel secure in your hand. And there's also a matte finish on the edges. So while the back and frame are part of the same piece of plastic, they differ by their finish. You'll find a fingerprint reader on the back which sticks out a bit just below the camera setup. It's lightning fast and it won't disappoint. As a whole, the Redmi 9 feels sturdy, and at 200 grams it's not light by any means, but it's not too much for its dimensions and the size of the battery. You'll find an IR blaster on the top and a headphone jack at the bottom. Sadly, where we expected the phone to really rock was battery life with its huge 5020 mAh battery, and boy did it deliver. It scored an outstanding 131 hours of endurance in our battery life test, so for most people you're looking at 2-day battery life. Charging was less impressive, and it wasn't that quick. You'll get 0 to 20% in half an hour with the charger in the box, or 0 to
And that means you get HD Netflix on this global version of the phone out of the box. And talking about performance, we have the Helio G80 here, a 12nm process with 3 gigs of RAM, and there are variants with higher RAM capacities. This is the only one though that they sell in Hong Kong, and 32 gigs of eMMC 5.1 storage. But regardless of the lower storage and RAM capabilities, we still managed to get a 356 single and 1200 multi-core score on this phone. And that's comparable to what you would see in Snapdragon 660 phones. For a phone of this price point, I think that's a real win. And here you see it, 184,000.
bottom firing speaker, and it had good loudness. Vocals and midtones are handled well, but unsurprisingly, bass is lacking.
Some action. Got some guns. Alright, let's see if we can find some action here. Oh!
Despite the price, the phone supports 4 cameras on the back. There's a 13-megapixel main sensor with an f2.2 aperture, an 8-megapixel ultra-wide sensor that also has an f2.2 aperture, a 5-megapixel macro cam, and a 2-megapixel depth sensor. During the day, photos are excellent for the budget class. They aren't the most detailed, nor do they have the most mind-blowing dynamic range and contrast. That said, the phone performed well in these areas and maintained reasonably low noise at the same time. Foliage isn't the sharpest, but it looks natural. There's an AI mode which adds extra punch to photos with increased saturation and contrast, but it's a little unnatural. If you want to zoom in, you'll be dealing with 2x digital zoom rather than optical. The ultra-wide is one of the better ones in its class and can challenge even some premium mid-rangers. Shots have an average amount of detail and colors are almost as accurate as those from the main cam. The dynamic range is great for an ultra-wide, and there's almost no noise when there's enough light. The macro camera has a fixed focus, so you need to keep within a certain distance from your subject in order to make sure that it's in focus. Portraits have good subject separation provided you don't have extremely messy hair. The blur is convincing, and as a whole, you'll be happy with the shots. In low light, shots with the main camera are nothing special, and the camera struggles to get the correct exposure. Photos were noisy, but usable for less demanding tasks like social media, which is good for this price range. Unfortunately, there is no night mode, which might have changed things up. Ultra-wide shots in low light are noisier and less detailed, and we wouldn't use this camera in the dark if it can be avoided. It'll do for the occasional shot around sunset and sunrise though. The 8-megapixel selfie snapper produced shots with mediocre detail but alright contrast and colors. We saw some noise and dynamic range is average, but HDR works well. Portrait mode for selfies also worked alright, though unsurprisingly, its subject separation is outright poor. The Redmi 9 can capture videos up to 1080p at 30fps. There is no 4K or 60 frames per second mode here sadly. Footage from the main camera has average detail and dull colors, but there's low noise and the dynamic range is good. If you zoom in, detail is a match for the non-zoom footage and colors are more saturated. The ultra-wide camera captures videos with nicer colors and contrast, but the detail levels remain mediocre.